Hello everyone, and welcome to Parsha with Passion. This week it is story time because this past week was my grandfather's yahrzeit, Meir Aaron Eisman, alav shalom, and I'm going to show you a picture of him right here. There you go. That's my grandfather smiling lovingly at my grandmother, and they were quite literally a king and a queen. And I'm going to start at the end of his life because I'm kind of the runt of the litter in my family, 8th out of 9, and that means that my memories of my grandfather were already when he was evolved, older. And these precious, precious memories, they show so much even when he was in a diminished state. It is not even, it's not normal. It's extraordinary. It's unusual. And to be quite honest, this is a strange thing to say, but I feel that his memory has not been properly remembered, honored. A person like this has there's an encyclopedia of deeds. There's an encyclopedia of things that we could learn from him. He was a giant of a man, and I have been remiss in not speaking about him enough, although we speak about him very often at our Shabbos table and to our children. And part of my wanting to share these stories with you, I have 3 reasons. First of all, it's inspiring. This is the kind of man that he was, is a person that he became, and we can all become. And the actions that he took were some great and some small, but they each had a kernel of greatness that we can learn from. We can do this. Secondly, it should be a merit for him. And thirdly, a gift to my mother and my father, who gave him and still give my grandmother so much respect in their lifetime. And my parents ask for so little. They literally ask for nothing. They just give. And I know that, Mommy, this is for you. And I hope that one day you make your own video or write your own book for the memories that you have, because mine is just like a wisp in the wind compared to the person that Appa was. So I want to take you all back towards the end of his life, where he had Alzheimer's. And I know that I'm not even telling you who he was, but you'll see who he was, even in Alzheimer's. So this was early stage Alzheimer's. And he came to visit in Baltimore, and this was very unusual. I don't even know why he was in Baltimore. The whole time that I was growing up, he lived in Israel, and then he and my grandmother would visit us once a year. So that he came to Baltimore when I was a married woman, I don't know, but I'm forever grateful. So like I said, he had early stage Alzheimer's, and so it was a tender time, and it was a very forgetful time. He would forget things. So every day we would wake up in the morning, and he would be so sweet with the children, and then he would walk outside and he would see all these trees. We lived on a property that had around 3/4 of an acre, and we shared this property with 3 other families. And he would see these trees, and he would burst forth from his heart, Ma enosh kisif kerenu uben adam kisif kedenu. Psalms, Tehillim would just come forth from him, and he would say, "What is man that you remember him?" He would praise Hashem, praise Hashem, praise Hashem, praise Hashem every day, because the day before he forgot that he said the same thing. So every day it was like a new experience. He would walk outside, he would see the trees, he would exclaim, "Wow, Hashem, just that tall trees." That's what he was looking at. We would get into the car, and so we got into the car and we'd put on classical music, and as you'll hear, a big part of his life was music. And so he would tweedle-deedle-deedle, and he would I can't explain his particular tweedledee on camera, and he would use his conductor arms to conduct the symphony in the car, and he knew all the music. So the next stop was at my children's nursery, and the teacher at that nursery at that time was a middle-aged woman who was, in my memory, very tired, very overwhelmed, and she had just this giant job and stuff was going on in her life. And I introduced her to my grandfather out of respect. I said, "We're here to drop off the child, and this is my grandfather. Nice to meet you, Rebbe Eisman." And I remember feeling like maybe I'm putting her out. She wasn't in the mood for a social visit, and he was an elderly man. Well, he stopped her in her tracks. He starts engaging her. Remember, this is with Alzheimer's. He says to her, "Do you know what the most important job in the world is?" And she said no. And she was still kind of not paying attention. And then he looks right at her and he says, "A teacher. It says about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hamalamed Torah la'Amo Yisrael." Hashem himself teaches Torah to Klal Yisrael. He's a Malamed. That means a Rebbe. To be a teacher is the most important job in the world. It's Hashem's job. That's the job that you're doing. And this principle, her face melted. She was seen. She was elevated. And she had tears in her eyes. That was only 8:30 a.m. with my grandfather. Next stop, we went to Radio Shack. At Radio Shack, there was a Nigerian man behind the counter. And we're buying something or other, I don't remember. And my grandfather says to him, "Do you know that I'm married to the most wonderful woman?" And again, we live in such a disconnected world, glazed eyes. You're just a customer. I don't want to be speaking to you. "Yeah, old man." He said, "Okay, yeah, that's wonderful." And my grandfather said, "Would you like to see a picture?" And he said, "Okay." And my grandfather took out a picture of him and my grandmother. I'll remind you of this picture right then. This was probably not the exact picture that was there, but I'll put it real close for you. Here you go. And she was actually a legendary beauty. And here she is. Look how sweet and beautiful in her 70s, I think. Yeah. So, yeah. So he shows this man behind the counter a picture of his wife. And again, this man melted in a moment of humanity that my grandfather elevated him. That's what he used to do. He would elevate him, and he brought him into this world. You're so important that I want to share my love of my wife with you. And in a moment, all this disconnection became connection, and we were three human beings in a little triangle of appreciation for love. The next place we went to was Walmart. And again, we're just talking about a few hours in the life of an old man who was compromised in his thinking at that time, but the love just spilled out of him. The love for people just poured from him. It was so natural. All he wanted to do was uplift people, and it was genuine. And that what was so startling is how genuine it was. The next stop was Walmart. And while we're waiting in line for Walmart, there was an old lady behind us, and she was not gracefully old. She was old and hunched over, and, her sparkle had dried up. And he turns to her and he says to her, "You look very beautiful today." She just started to glow. It was probably years since she had heard that. And that was just a few hours with my grandfather in his illness. He was a person that was so dignified, that was such a king, that in his presence you became royalty. And he was a person that saw the royalty in everyone, that sought to do kindness. It's inexplicable. One day we came to his house, it was Shabbos, we came to with the children, and lined up on his couch were teddy bears. Now this is a classy house, well maintained, and I'm not talking about fancy, I'm talking about old world class with art on the walls and classical music and some golden goblets in an Israeli apartment. And they brought that class with them. And what were these teddy bears doing? It was so incongruous. And he said to my children, he said, "Okay, you can each pick a teddy bear. Which one would you like?" He said in his English accent. And the children picked a teddy bear, and we said, "Appa, what's this about? Where'd you get these teddy bears?" He said, "Well, there was a man who set up a kiosk outside selling teddy bears. Now, where my grandfather lived, and I'll tell you later about how he got there, it was in a very Hasidish neighborhood. As a matter of fact, it was in an exclusively Hasidish neighborhood, and he was the non-Hasid. He was very close to the Klausenberger Rebbe, and that's why he lived there, and he was a very important part of the community. But this was not a community that was into teddy bears. They have a different language. They have a different appreciation. And here was this man who probably came from nearby Netanya, a beach town, and he thought, I'll sell little colorful teddy bears. I'll make some money for my family. And Appa said, I saw this man and I knew he's not going to sell teddy bears here. And I thought, this man, he has to go home to his family. He started out the day with great hopes and he's going to walk home with nothing. So what did he do? What would I do? I would buy a teddy bear from the man, I hope. What did he do? He bought all the teddy bears. He bought every single one of those teddy bears, that the man shouldn't have to spend any more time just waiting around, not getting business. And we're not talking about, my grandfather was not a super rich man. He just had to buy those teddy bears because he saw the humanity. Here's a person trying to make a living, and he was a big advocate of supporting your fellow Jew in their business. Whatever, if they're trying to make it, you help them. When he was working in Laniado Hospital, this is on that note of appreciating every person, he was in charge of public relations. So he would give the donors tours around the hospital, and he would tell them about the great work that they're doing and show them the new ICU and the neonatal unit and the new ER and all these kinds of accomplishments. And accomplishments is the wrong word. I'm losing my right word. And he would show them around, but he didn't stop there. He said, now let me show you the important people, the people who make this place run. And he would take these fancy rich donors who came to visit the hospital, he would take them behind the scenes into the kitchen, and he would say, this is the cook, and he knew the cook by name. He's the one who makes the food that nourishes these people so they could get better, and there's no cook like him. His food is delicious. And he elevated the cook. And it wasn't contrived. It was real, as you see from the end of his life, when he didn't have all his calculations going, when it was free-flowing and his brain was compromised, he was doing the same thing. He really meant it. You can't see a hospital and not see the very man cooking the food, feeding the people. And then he introduced them to the custodian. And he would never call anyone a janitor. No, my mother won't either. Language is so important. And I learned that a lot from my mother. I say I'm the only person left in my generation who still calls things lovely, because that's how my mother says it. It's not a janitor. It's a custodian or a housekeeper. It's someone who's an integral part of this place running. And he would introduce the custodians by name and tell the benefactors about how important it was that the custodians show up, and they show up with a smile and they do their work. His unofficial job was that he was the personnel department. He would make shalom between people. You can only make shalom. If there was any trouble in the hospital, people would come to him. Because you can only make shalom when you see two elevated people, two good people standing in front of you, and you want shalom for them. I want to go back to where he came from, and I'm gonna start from the beginning. So he was born in Germany into a very, very rich family, very wealthy family. They hadn't always been wealthy. As a matter of fact, a few generations back, they were very, very poor. And they lived in a place called Grevenstein. And in Grevenstein, I think I get mixed up with my greats, but that's one of my greats, maybe my fourth great grandfather. His wife passed away when his children were quite young, and he worked day and night, very, very, very hard to make a living. And his boys saw how hard he worked, and they were motivated to work to help him also, and eventually they made it. They actually started making a very good living, and they moved to a town called Eschwig. And in Eschwig, they got married and they settled down, and they said, and we have a family book where it speaks about this, they said, we were so happy that now we could provide our father with a kind of stability and comfort that he never had in his entire life. And so in his very old age, they invited my great-great-grandfather four greats, to live with them. He moved in there. He settled into Eshwick, finally reaping the fruits of his labor, seeing his children and his grandchildren living in comfort, finally not working hard. And one day, he gets a letter. And this letter was from a very important man whose name was Kaiser. And Kaiser had been struck with blindness. And he had looked out for him. He had taken him on walks and generally befriended him. And Kaiser sent him a letter, and he said, "When I was struck with blindness, I was struck once. But now that you have gone, I've been struck twice, and the loss is greater than I can bear. The light has gone out of my day. When I had you by my side, taking walks with you, I could see, I could hear, I could live, I could learn. And now the light has gone out completely. And my heart breaks. And I miss you so much." And he read this letter, and he told his children, "I'm moving back." He said, "My life is almost over, and there's nothing greater that I could do for my afterlife. There's nothing greater that I could do than to do this kindness." And so, at the end of his life, it's just so, you can't even breathe when you think about it. When he was with his children and with his grandchildren, and remember, he was widowed. This was all that he had. He left it all behind to go take walks with a blind man in a small town. And that is where he died. And I'm positive that there's no way that he could know that that one deed would be remembered for generations and generations and generations and generations, and would manifest itself in the custodian being remembered, recognized, being called by name, uplifted. My parents are the same way. There's no higher and lower to them. There's no better or worse to them. Everyone has a place in their hearts. Everyone who needs help is worthy of getting help. Everyone is elevated. Everyone is seen. And this is where it all began. So fast forward to when my grandfather was growing up in Germany. His family they had been in the antique business, and back in the day they sold antiques to the czars, and they were very well-to-do, and he did not grow up in an atmosphere of affection. He grew up without a lot of verbal or physical affection, but with a lot of dignity. And when he was 12 years old, the Nazis took a lot of things and bought a lot of things, and it was pre-war, but already the Nazis were coming into power, and they saw it was very dangerous, and they moved to England. In England, he spent the next few years, and then war broke out in earnest. There was bombing in England, bombing in Germany, everything was chaos, and someone named Dr. Schoenfeld, he made a deal with the government, and he organized something called the Kindertransport. In the Kindertransport, they would take the children from Germany and bring them to England, and they would bring them to the English countryside away from all the bombing. And these were little German children, Yiddish speaking, and he took responsibility for all of them. May his memory be a blessing. And my grandfather, I'm going to call him Appa from here on. We could share him for this hour. Appa, at that time, was 20 years old, and he became a teacher in Shefford in the countryside. Who was he in his youth, was someone very much like my brother Ben Sion. It reminds me of him a lot when I hear these stories. Someone with magnetism, someone with the ability to rally people for the good cause, somebody with the ability to lead with a chuckle and with confidence and own Malchus, own it. And ironically, most of the people that he was teaching in those days were girls. And I'm laughing because there's actually a book that's written about those days in this small town called Shefford. And the author there writes about how the girls, like there was one male teacher. It was a funny time. So they all had his eye on him. And how did he meet my grandmother? Because her Her sister was in Shefford, so she was still in the city in England, and her mother was sick, so she would be the one to pay visits to her sister. And when she would visit her sister, that is when she would meet my grandfather. That is when she met him. And this is kind of a side story, but it's interesting. When I was 17, I was thinking about marrying my husband, which is a whole nother story. And I knew him since I was 13 because his sister married my brother, Lev Shalom. So he was in the family, and that's probably how I, was starting to think about marriage at a very young age. And my grandmother, she sat me down for a talk. And in this talk, she told me about how many men had proposed to her and that she said no to all of them because they weren't the right one. Then it came to my grandfather, and he proposed to her as well. And she said, no, I don't want to marry you. I don't want to marry someone who's so public, who has such magnetism. I don't want to marry someone who I'm going to share with the world. No, thank you. And she said no again and again. And she told me this herself. She said, I said no every time we met for 2 years. This is just a funny story. Then one day, she said, I'm going to say yes. Today is the day I'm going to say yes. He finally won her heart. Finally, she felt secure. And that day, they were at her mother's house, and she was waiting for the moment, and there was no moment. They were not alone. She organized a picnic. Her mother wanted to come on the picnic. They were going to be alone in her house. Then her mother says, could you please put up the curtains. So there they are. They're putting up the curtains, and she looks at him, and she says, Meyer, aren't you going to ask me to marry you? And he says, no, why should I? You always say no. So classic. And she said, but I was going to say yes this time. And that's how they began. Really, really the love story of a lifetime. She told me that when she first married him, if she would touch him, he would jump, because he grew up in Germany and she grew up in this warm Hasidic Romanian culture. And he would jump and she would say, it's okay, we're married. By the time I knew him, by the time he was my oppa, his big, beautiful hands would come around on your shoulders when we would wash, Natil Sidem, when we would wash, all sitting around the table quietly, and he would sing and sing and sing his nigunim, and he would knead our shoulders and massage with so much generosity. She taught him really, really well. So much unconditional love. And he would look at us and he would say, did I tell you today how much I love you? And sometimes you would say yes, and sometimes you would say no. And then he would say, I love you. And there was so much love in him. It was like a bountiful love. And combined with so much confidence, so much stateliness, he was a fundraiser for the hospital, and he would make friends with people. He used to say, there's no such thing as strangers. A stranger is a friend that I haven't yet met. Like the man in Radio Shack became his friend. Everyone became his friend. He wasn't stingy with his love. He had enough to go around. And he had enough for himself also. Listen to this story. So again, this is when he had Alzheimer's. So he was in his apartment in Jerusalem, and he was wearing way too many coats and sweaters. Sometimes you just do irrational things when it comes to Alzheimer's. So he had on coats and sweaters, and it was sweaty, it was hot, it was not healthy for him. And his caretakers and my cousin was saying, Oppa, take it off. Oppa, come, take it off. And they were cajoling him and trying to convince him, but he would not be convinced. And he was just going to keep on all these layers. Well, my brother-in-law's brother walked inside, and he said, you want Oppa to take his coats off? Don't worry, I know what to do. And so he said, Oppa, I'm a yeshiva boy, and I'm so cold. It's so cold in yeshiva. And Oppa said, oh, you're cold? No. Oh, let me give you a sweater. And he would take off his sweater. He did. He took off his sweater, and he gave it to him. A few minutes later, remember with the Alzheimer, so there was forgetting, he said, Oppa, I'm so cold in yeshiva. It's so chilly in there. I'm so chilly. Oppa said, do you need a coat? Do you need a sweater? Here, take mine. And this is how he he helped Abba to take off all of his layers of sweaters. This was the kind of man that he was, that even in his compromised state, here, take it, here, with pleasure, go ahead, enjoy. That's just how he was. And every day when the caretaker would leave, he would turn and he would look at his wife and he would say, such a fine woman, we must have her for Shabbos. Or I think it was at that time also the boy, such a fine boy, we must have him for Shabbos. Again and again, every day with a fresh amount of love. Sometimes we walk in this world, we want to make a nice impression. We want to go out of our way. We're stretching ourselves. For him, he was so refined. He has such an abundant sense of love that he just gave it out freely. So there he was the teacher in Shefford, going back, and eventually he did marry my grandmother. And he lived in England. They lived in England, and he had really two loves. He was in chinuch. He became a teacher, and ultimately a principal. And he also loved music very, very much. And so, even when he was a principal, he had this side business of organizing concerts. And he would be on very close terms with some very important people in the classical music world and in the opera world. And it's just very interesting because sometimes when we hear about a great man, we paint a very black and white picture. And when we write about great people, we want to brand people. We want to say, they excelled at chesed, they excelled at this, they excelled at learning. And I think as a culture, we're less comfortable with the colorfulness of people. And there was there was no box for my grandfather. He was his own box. He was both in the world and in Torah. And he evolved and became, and sometimes we read about people and we think they were always like this. All of this greatness was in him, but it unfolded layer by layer and blossomed. And a lot of that also had to do with my grandmother. She knew that what he could be with his charisma was some kind of superstar, really pretty much any kind of superstar that he wanted, especially in the music world, which can be kind of a filthy place. And she didn't want that for him. At one point, she went to America and to visit her, I think it was her mother, and she said, please, and he said to her, see what kind of opportunities there are in the music world. And she came back and she said, no, there's really not too much happening in the music world, but there is a job to be a principal. She kind of guided him and directed him. She had her sights set on his greatness. And so when he came to America, he was the principal in a few places and ultimately landed up in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And there he was a principal, and it was during the days post-Holocaust when people weren't sending their kids to Jewish schools. They were sending them to public schools. To be a principal of a Jewish school meant literally, besides for fundraising, that you were knocking on doors and saying, hello, I'm here for your child's Jewish future. Do you want to send your child to a Jewish school? And explaining the value and pulling teeth and making it happen and growing the school from 30 children to 150 children, growing it. And he ultimately became very involved in the community and at the communal level, and that's how he had friends in very, very high places. He was always seeking to help people, and he was not scared to get involved. And at one point, the Klausenberger Rebbe Zatzal, he came to Minneapolis. Now, if you're not familiar with the Klausenberger Rebbe, I recommend getting the books about him. That's for sure. Tremendous things to say about him. He went through the Holocaust, and he lost all 10 of his children. And he swore, and I'm so bad at numbers that I get scared that maybe I'm saying wrong numbers. Maybe it was 11, honestly. And he promised himself that he would build an institution, one for each of his children. And that's how Kiryat Sanz was born. He started this community later on in his life, and he started building institutions that would be for the memory of his children. To this day, they're there. You go to Kiryat Sanz, Netanya, there is an orphanage. You might have seen my daughter Minky raising money for the orphanage, amazing place, Lev Lelev, a girls' orphanage there. There's a hospital, an all halachically run hospital. That means that they abide by Torah law with everything that they do. Top-notch hospital. There is a nursing school to train nurses. There's a kollel. There's a yeshiva. There's a school. I don't know all the rest of the institutions. This is a man who was a visionary of chesed. When he was in the DP camps after the war, forget that he was just as skeletal as everyone else. He took it upon himself first to make sure that all the dead had proper burials. People died in the DP camps, and he would rally people to make sure that they had proper burials. Then he worked on arranging kosher food. This is at a time where people were ravenous. They were happy with scraps. And he made sure that there was kosher for everyone. There's a famous story about him that on Erev Yom Kippur, when every person prepares themselves for Yom Kippur, and especially such a tzaddik, he saw a girl and she was sad, and he said, how can I help you, my child? And she said, my father's not here to bless me. On Erev Yom Kippur, we give our children a very special blessing. And so he said, I will be your father. And he blessed her. And another child heard about this, and another, and another, and another. And all Yom Kippur afternoon, not thinking about himself, thinking about all the other children, he gave each one a blessing. That's not all. The stories are endless and tremendous. One story that's very, it kind of shocks my system to imagine this, is that at one point the Klausenberger Rebbe was working in the forest, and there was machinery that made some kind of cement. This is where that was where the slave labor was at that time in the forest. And he would not eat without washing Negelwasser. If you're not familiar, in the morning we wash our hands 6 times in a special way, and this is a purification. And he would not eat until he did that. And so he would work a 12-hour shift, and then for the next 12 hours he would collect water. How do you collect water in a forest, in a slave labor camp, where there are no rivers and streams? He would stand by the cement machinery and he would catch the droplets of condensation until he filled up a cup. And he would make sure to wash Negelwasser. This is the kind of man that he was, a massive neshama, an inspiration. When he moved to America, he opened Beis Yaakov after Beis Yaakov. He slept 4 hours a night for about 11 years. Just a giant of a man. So he met my grandfather and he recognized greatness in him. And he offered my grandfather a job in the hospital. Well, the hospital at that time was pretty much just a building. It wasn't built up. And my grandfather became a partner with him in building it up. In those days, $1 million was a lot of money. And my father just told me that at 1 year he raised $1 million. It's just a tremendous amount. And all the people that he raised from, he would befriend them. He told my brother, you don't ask for money, you just build relationship. Again, not contrived. He meant it. When you build a relationship, you begin to care about what the other person cares about. He would send notes and cards and make sure to make visits. In that time, Las Vegas was all owned by Jewish people. He would go to Las Vegas. He was friends with the owners of casinos. He could mix in any crowd. He could mix in a casino. He could mix with the Rebbe, because he wasn't. In Yiddish you would say verschmutzt. Like he wasn't soiled by any interaction. He led with his dignity. He was the one who elevated everything around him. When you know someone, you never really know them. And a child, in many ways, never really knows their parents. And how much more so a grandchild never really knows their grandparent. And as I'm giving these stories over to you, there is more. There is more. This is a wisp. This is a nothing. This is a tiny, tiny taste of the person that he was.
Judy, wasn't enough room for us. My name is Meir Eisenman. I remember your father from London when you came, stayed with the Hoffmans. Oh, shalom aleichem. Hey, you. Hey, you. Now you look this way. That's a lovely smile. That was really a great smile. Why do they expect kids to smile all the time? You have to smile all the time. Hey, you have to smile at your offer. Hey, you have to smile all the time.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam asher boros osain v'simcho chosan v'chalom.
Mama thinking she doesn't know how He's taking pictures of you. Yeah, you ready? No one's ready.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's your